Right. Proofs, part 1, page 11. I'll work through some of these, although the title says practice. I'll do like one on each page and give you some sort of guide here. Let's do number 2. Has the least amount of given, I guess. So we'll start with number 2 here on page 11. So first of all, I'm going to read the given. Then I'm going to mark it on the figure, and then write, the given in the statements or the reasons over here where I can. So number 1, SQ bisects RQT and RST. So it bisects both of those angles. So that's the given. So to mark that, SQ, there's not really anything to mark, I guess, because it's a bisector, but I'm just going to note what angles are congruent and then find it in my proof. If I didn't already have the statements, then I would write that down. Like, since I have a bisector, I would go immediately down to my statement and write down the 2 congruent angles. And this bisector of this other angle, write those 2 congruent angles because of the bisector. And then I would go back and say, okay, how can I use that? So let's see. A lot of times it's easier to, if you don't have the statements, to work backwards. Like, notice what you need to prove, and then, okay, here's what I have, and here's what I need. If I only have these 2, okay, how can I get to that? And you kind of work your way backwards through the proof to see what you can show congruent or whatever you need in order to prove the triangle is congruent or whatever. Okay, so let's go and mark the figure. SQ bisects RQT. So that means this one and this one are the same, and those 2 are the same because it also bisects RST. So it's probably written over here in the statement, as you would write down if you didn't have the statement. RQS, TQS, okay. Those are both the definition of angle bisector, or if you just wrote bisector, that's fine. Okay, so I've got the bisector. Now they say, since I needed the 2 triangles congruent, and that's what I'm proving, I have 2 angles. Now, if I had another side somewhere, I would have angle, angle, side, or any combination of 2 angles and a side. But since I see that the 2 figures are together, they share this side, okay, I can always assume that that's going to be used. Like, I'm going to need that shared side. And if I do, say, okay, those 2 are the same, they're same to each other. I already had the statement, but I'm just saying as if I didn't already have the statement. I would look for shared sides, or shared angles. This side is congruent to itself. So that's the reflexive property. Okay, now I have angle, side, angle. So now the 2 triangles are congruent by angle, side, angle. All right, let's go over the page. Let's do, I don't know, 5. Let's see, what am I starting with? Let's see, HI congruent to JG and HI parallel to GJ. Okay, so those are the given statements. So I'm going to fill that in. Now I'm going to go to the figure and write down what I can. HI congruent to JG, and HI is also parallel to GJ. Okay. So if they're parallel, from the parallel, you're always going to have congruent angles. So you need to go figure out what congruent angles you're going to have and if you need them. So we're going to work backwards. I want these 2 triangles to be congruent. So I have a side. Okay, so let's find some angles. Or what else do I know? I mean, you could look at the statements and kind of guess the way it's going to happen here. You can see that they have these 2 angles congruent GJH and IHJ. Oh, well, why are those two angles congruent? Well, these two parallel lines have this transversal. Those are alternate interior angles. Alternate interior angles are congruent. First, we had to know those lines are parallel. Then we could say they're congruent. Then they have this congruent to itself. Well, why did they want that? Why did they want that one? Well, because if you have an angle on a side, well, this other side puts the angle between the two, so that's side angle side. So HJ and JH, so that's reflexive. And side angle side. Okay, let's go to page 13. Let's see what we got. I'll just do the middle one, I guess, again. Number 8. So now we're filling in our own statements. So it says E is the midpoint of AB and CD. So I'm going to write that in. E is midpoint of AB and CD, and that is given. Okay, so now I've written it down, given. Now I'm going to go mark it on the figure. If E is the midpoint of A to B, that means that AE would be congruent to BE. So I'm going to write that in my statement before I forget it. AE is congruent to BE. That's because of the midpoint. So the definition of midpoint is what would be my reason. Now, have I used all the givens? Not yet. E is the midpoint of AB. It's also the midpoint of CD. Oh, the other direction. Okay, CD. So I'm going to mark what I know to be true because of the midpoint. Well, those two sides will be the same. So I'm going to write that down. So that's going to be CE would be congruent to CEDE. And that's the same reason, because of the midpoint. So we use the given to come up with a couple of things. Now, I haven't even looked at what I need to be proven, but I probably could assume, just looking at it quickly, that these two triangles here are what I'm trying to prove to be congruent. AEC and BED. All right, so what do I need? Well, if I knew that DB was congruent to AC somehow, that would have side, side, side. Okay, otherwise, I'm going to need, if I had the angle in between the two sides, like these two angles, I'd have side angle side. So I'm kind of working backwards, saying, okay, what do I need in order to prove these two triangles congruent? Or two other angles. Well, I don't really have a way to find magically. I don't have parallel lines, but I do know that these two angles here are vertical, and that's an angle I can use. That would make it side angle side. Okay, so let's work back to that way. Let's write down the vertical angles. So I'm going to say angle AEC, I'll say the angle AEC would be congruent to the angle BED. Okay, those two angles are congruent. I'll just mark them because they're vertical. Okay, vertical angles. All right, so now we have the two triangles congruent because we've found an angle between two sides, so side angle side is going to be our reason. All right, I think that's the end of those. Okay, so you do the ones we didn't do.